Well, first of all, the Trump relations are needed as national security is involved, national safety, our economy, and the chaos that is existing right now in multiple regions around the world. And even as a transitional president, I mean, waiting to get back to the Oval Office, he's already sending those signals. It was well received in France at the Notre Dame inauguration, waiting for the actual inauguration. America needs to be looked at differently from the last 4 years, and I think Donald Trump is ready for that.
Yeah, Walid, meantime, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy spoke out, and he said this: Ukraine lacks the might to retake occupied territories. How does that play into peace talks? And we've also seen reports that Russian President Vladimir Putin was speaking at a press briefing today that said he's open to talks between both sides. Would there be a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia? Is that even a possibility now?
Well, let's be direct with what's happening. The war started in February of 22. By the fall of 22, it was, strategic experts understood that neither Moscow, Russia, is going to be able to occupy all of Ukraine and create a pro-Russian Ukrainian government. Impossible, because the West was already supporting Ukraine and Zelenskyy and his government with as much as they needed to preserve that state from falling. At the same time, Ukrainian forces, with all the billions and billions of dollars that were sent to them, with all the weaponry system and even the decision to allow them to lob missiles inside Russia, was not able, and now Zelenskyy concede that they won't be able at this point in time to take back all of the eastern and southern provinces of Ukraine. That's a reality. Based on that, the Russians and the Ukrainians got involved in a war for 3 additional years with all the destructions until they realize that this fact is not going to change. The Russians are hesitating to admit it, but they're going to be facing a lot of problems inside Russia. Soon I can talk about that. But Zelenskyy now, with the election of President Trump, is realizing that that would be the policy of the United States. And I conclude that, yes, indeed, we're going to see negotiations. We're going to see a settlement at one point in time. Not everybody's going to be happy, but that is something that's going to happen.
Yeah, you mentioned all the destruction, also the death that has ensued in the years this war has dragged on. But you're right. I mean, when you're doing a touch base on morale for these what are you learning about those in Russia?
Russia is in a different situation. After the withdrawal from Syria, we're going to connect everything. Their power in the Mediterranean is going to be very limited. But there is something else that experts will start to see soon, is that those forces who took the control inside Russia, they were fighting the Russians for the previous 7 years, probably may start mobilizing the same type of jihadi forces inside Russia. And that's much bigger than everything they could think of, and the Russians will be ready at this point in time to negotiate. They're not saying it, but they feel that this is coming to them as well.
President-elect Trump spoke earlier this week on many topics. One of them was Zelenskyy, and we have that. Watch.
We should be prepared to make a deal. That's all. Got to be a deal. No, got to be a deal. Too many people being killed. That is a war that's hard. Too many people. Got to make a deal. And Putin has to make a deal too.
And so we touched on this already in this interview about making a deal, a peace deal, an agreement. What is the next step when Trump takes office and this topic of a deal comes up? How does President Trump get that done?
Well, in my view, there are going to be 3 stages. The most important one is stage 1, a ceasefire. It's going to take months and months to prepare for a ceasefire because the war is so much interconnected between the Russians and the Ukrainians. It will be a world achievement just to get to a ceasefire. That's number 1. Number 2, they will have to do a deal. The deal is not going to be an overnight deal. It's going to be a trilateral negotiation, the Russians, the Ukrainians, the Trump administration, and then they'll bring in the EU and everybody else. We're going to see another 6 months of that. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the peace between the Ukrainians and the Russians it's not going to come from us or from the Europeans. They will have to have changes inside their societies. If you look at the youth, both in Ukraine and in Russia, what do they want? More war? No, the Russians are all over Florida, all over New York. The Ukrainians are everywhere. And the outlook for the future, the peoples want peace, but they need a framework. And that framework is the responsibility of the international community. And President Trump has committed to do it, and he will do it.
Yeah.